Thailand.
Yeah.
It's a country that conjures up, really vibrant images, doesn't it? Intricate temples, bustling cities.
Absolutely. It's got such a strong visual identity today.
But what we're diving into today is the history beneath that surface, a history stretching back over 40 millennia. I mean, just think about that, 40,000 years.
It's an incredible time span. Really puts things in perspective.
So in this deep dive, we're taking a journey through Thailand's really long and complex past. We'll be looking at everything from archaeological finds, chronicles of ancient kingdoms,
Accounts of foreign relations, analyses of social and economic changes, all sorts of sources.
Exactly. And our mission, for you listening, is to cut through all those layers and pull out the most important insights and maybe some surprising facts about Thailand's historical journey.
Yeah, and what hits you right away is just how long humans have been in the area we now call Thailand. The evidence points to settlements going back over 40,000 years.
40,000. That fits into the bigger picture of early human migrations out of Africa, right?
Precisely. These sources suggest Southeast Asia was actually a pretty significant pathway, maybe through places like the Andaman Islands or the Isthmus of Kra.
Wow. Imagining those early humans making journeys like that, it's quite something. And the sources mention specific spots.
Cave sites north of Bangkok, in central Thailand, even out on islands like Phuket and Krabi. These look like they were early camps, maybe shelters.
And there's that fascinating detail about how they were found, something about being underwater.
Yeah, that's right. Many sites were flooded for a long, long time. It's only through more recent geological processes, the carbonate formation, that artifacts have been revealed. Minerals basically formed protective layers over them.
Like little time capsules, preserving them. Amazing.
It really is. And the world they lived in, totally different from today. Paleontology tells us it was drier, a mix of forests and open grasslands.
Supporting different kinds of animals, too, I gather.
Oh yeah, big ones. Elephants, rhinos, even hippo species that aren't there now. Discoveries from places like Changdao Cave and Khao Kichakut paint this picture. It's almost an alien landscape compared to modern Thailand.
And they found tools, and more than just basic tools.
Definitely. Sharpened tools, but also these unique curvilinear engravings in caves up north. What's really intriguing is they look similar to things found way over in the Himalayas and even the Andes.
Seriously, the Andes, that suggests some kind of incredible long-distance cultural connection millennia ago.
It raises those questions, yeah. It's pretty mind-bending to think about the possible reach of early human symbolism and interaction.
Those engravings really capture the imagination, and the archaeology keeps revealing more, doesn't it? Paleolithic finds in the Chao Phraya Basin, Neolithic sites in the Northeast.
Right. Discoveries are still happening. Those Paleolithic remains were found about a century ago. The Neolithic sites more like 50 years ago.
Those burial sites in the Northeast, the Upper Mun River Basin, they sound significant.
They are, especially in a Southeast Asian context, because of their scale. But there's a bit of a puzzle.
Oh.
Well, the range of crafts found at the burials is somewhat limited, and crucially, there aren't any associated settlements nearby. So it leaves us wondering, what was daily life like for the people who made these?
Right. Where did they actually live? Interesting. And we have even older evidence, too. Fossils, stone tools.
Yes, going back much further, fossils of anatomically modern humans from caves like Tama Prau and these lower Paleolithic tools, hammerstones, choppers, flakes, some dated between 1.6 and 0.7 million years ago.
Wow. Over 1 million years. That's a direct link to our really distant ancestors, found alongside old riverbeds with extinct animals.
Exactly. Finds near Kanchanaburi, for instance, paint a picture of that ancient environment. And then there's the evidence for Homo erectus.
Okay, tell me about that. What does that tell us?
Well, the finds at Kum Swanagan Cave are key. They found a human jaw there, similar to fossils from Java, so it's called Erecta Homo indicus java.
Erecta Homo.
And finding it alongside various animal fossils suggests they were using tools, maybe even hunting cooperatively, working together to bring down bigger animals.
Supper hunting, basically.
Something like that, yeah. And separately, skeletal remains called Photharam Man, found in Ratchaburi Caves, suggest a culture that was maybe already a bit more developed than some later Neolithic groups.
So we're seeing this long, slow development of human presence and complexity, which brings us to a really major shift. The Neolithic period and farming. Where did agriculture come from in this region?
The current thinking, based on the sources, is that it first developed in Southwest Asia and then spread eastward. It reached southern China and then moved into northern Thailand.
And rice was key.
Absolutely pivotal. Rice cultivation coming from the Yangtze River Valley maybe 8,500 years ago. This was quite different from the existing hunter-gatherer or collector cultures that were common in Southeast Asia before then. Settled farming seems to have developed independently and then spread out from northern Thailand around the second millennium BCE.
And the landscape itself played a role.
Definitely. The fertile lowlands in Thailand and the Mekong Valley were perfect for agriculture to really take off. And that, in turn, spurred other developments, bronze and ironworking, even early forms of writing on palm leaves.
It's such a fundamental change, moving from a nomadic life to settling down. And it sounds like the influence from China in that farming transition was pretty significant.
It seems so. We have evidence of grain cultivation in places like Kanchanaburi and Konkan, starting maybe 6,000 years ago. Then, about 2,500 years ago, you see paddy farming, wet rice, and more polished pottery styles appearing.
Which would support bigger communities, right?
Exactly. Denser societies, more complex organization. Archaeologists break down the Neolithic into phases like Ban Chang, known for its pottery, which then evolves into Bronze Age and Iron Age cultures. It shows a clear progression. The environment and these farming techniques really shaped how settled life spread out from the earlier fishing and collecting cultures.
Okay, so from these incredibly deep prehistoric roots, we move into the Age of Kingdoms. The 13th century CE often gets called the start of Thailand's Golden Age with Sukhothai. Why was Sukhothai so important?
Sukhothai really represents the first fully formed Thai state with its own distinct identity. King Ramkhamhaeng is the famous figure, traditionally seen as the founder and the creator of the Thai alphabet.
Although there's some debate about the alphabet timing.
Yeah, later chronicles suggest the script might have come a bit later or evolved over time. But regardless, Sukhothai flourished. It had agricultural surpluses, expanding trade networks.
Including with China.
Yes, participating in China's tributary system, which often sounds like subordination, but in practice, acknowledging China's sort of nominal supremacy often opened up really valuable trade opportunities. Plus, Sukhothai cities grew, challenging the long-held power of the Khmer Empire.
So it went from being maybe a local center known for stoneware, ceramics.
Right, to a major regional power. And you see the evidence in things like crystal, bronzeware, ceramics being found much further afield.
But it didn't just spring up out of nowhere. It must have been influenced by the Khars, who were dominant before.
Oh, absolutely. You can see Khmer influence clearly in Sukhothai's religion, its architecture, how it organized itself politically. But interestingly, you also see the start of something distinctly Thai, like using local brick in temple building, moving away from the classic Khmer stone style.
The beginning of a unique Thai architectural tradition. And Sukhothai had its ups and downs, but its influence spread quite far at its peak.
It did. By the mid-14th century, its reach was considerable, north towards China, east, south, down the Malay Peninsula, west towards Burma. A pretty big sphere of influence.
Covering parts of Laos and Khmer provinces too, it seems. But this was also a time when other powers were rising. And Sukhothai eventually declined.
That's a crucial point. Sukhothai's peak overlaps with the rise of Ayutthaya, its eventual successor, and also various Lai principalities. Plus, you had powerful empires growing elsewhere, like in India and the Indonesian archipelago.
So a lot happening regionally.
A lot. By the first half of the 15th century, Sukhothai's power was definitely fading. This also happened around the time the Koryo dynasty in Korea weakened, and the last major Khmer king at Angkor fell. But importantly, Khmer cultural and political influence didn't just vanish, it carried on and actually became even more pronounced in the next big kingdom, Ayutthaya.
Right, which leads us straight to Ayutthaya. It rose up in the late 14th century and became the dominant force for, almost 400 years?
Yeah, until the mid-18th century. Ayutthaya definitely built on what Sukhothai started, but it also borrowed heavily from the Khmer Empire, especially early on.
And it grew powerful through conquest.
Largely, yes. Military campaigns were key. They pushed into Khmer territory, even captured the great city of Angkor in 1431, though they never fully controlled it long term.
Interesting. And their relationship with other nearby kingdoms, like in Laos?
They invaded Laos and Lancang repeatedly, but interestingly, they often let the existing cultural and political structures remain. So other Thai kingdoms, like Lana and Lancang, managed to survive alongside Ayutthaya.
So military power, but maybe some pragmatism too. And Ayutthaya is known for its big building projects.
Definitely. Later Ayutthayan kings oversaw monumental works, especially Buddhist temples, often referencing Angkor or other older sites, and they built impressive hydraulic systems for water control, which was vital for agriculture and city life.
Now, going back to Sukhothai's origins, you mentioned it started with a revolt against the Khmers.
That's the traditional story, yeah. Around 1238 AD, local Thai leaders, Phokun Bangklanghao and Wichai, supposedly led a rebellion against Khmer rule and established Sukhothai. The population was likely a mix of Mon, Khmer, and Thai people.
And it controlled a big area initially.
Quite significant territory across modern Thailand and into Laos. But even though Thai people had been migrating south for a while, the Khmer still held on to key areas further south, like Thang Long. Sukhothai's power peaked, but then started to fade by the late 13th century, especially as Ayutthaya began its rise down south in the early 14th.
Even though King Ramkhamhaeng's reign is seen as this cultural high point.
Right, traditionally linked to the alphabet in his biography. But his successors found it harder to maintain that central authority and independence. Foreign accounts from the time seem to back this up, suggesting Sukhothai wasn't the major power it once was by the mid-15th century.
And Sukhothai's decline happens around the same time as the Khmer kingdom of Angkor is also weakening. What caused Angkor's decline?
It seems like a combination of things. The continued southward migration of Thai people was likely a factor, shifting demographics. But also, the sources mentioned persistent attacks, sea raiders, attacks along the rivers leading to Angkor.
Making it vulnerable.
Exactly. This apparently prompted a group called the Khmer Swidid clan, who lived in the Ayutthaya area historically, to move. Then King Utham, a Thai or Lao leader, settled his people right at that strategic spot where the Patsak and Chao Phraya rivers meet, around 1350.
And that became Ayutthaya.
That became Ayutthaya. And from there, it was a base to launch raids against Angkor. Eventually, the Thai king of Ayutthaya led successful attacks, both by river and land, and became the first to actually sack Angkor.
A huge moment, a fundamental shift in regional power.
Absolutely. Over the next century and a half, Angkor's influence just steadily decreased, and Ayutthaya's grew. Part of it was trade crucial sea routes shifted south, and Ayutthaya gained control, bringing in a lot of wealth.
And some Khmers were even incorporated into the Thai system?
Yeah, apparently many became part of the Thai nobility, adopting their ways. But then there's this slightly mysterious event in 1431. New invaders arrived, described as semi-barbaric, using ships with cannons, attacking Angkor and Khmer forts.
Cannons? It sounds like maybe European influence creeping in. Or perhaps Chinese.
The sources aren't entirely clear on who these invaders were, but it was a major blow. The Khmer king fled, though he did eventually return and there was a bit of a resurgence. But it definitely marked a period of decline for Angkor, with Ayutthaya becoming the undisputed major player in the region for a long time.
It's easy to forget just how powerful the Khmer Empire was in its prime, though. From the 9th to 13th centuries, its influence was enormous.
It really was. Culturally, politically, technologically, commercially, they dominated much of mainland Southeast Asia. Present-day Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, southern Vietnam. Angkor Wat is just the most famous symbol of that.
A truly advanced civilization.
Absolutely. Complex irrigation, monumental architecture, incredible art, defined social structures. They adopted Hinduism, then later Buddhism, fueling this golden age. And their architectural style, those iconic temple complexes, prangs. The Thais clearly adopted and adapted elements of that later. You see it in Ayutthaya.
Where did the Khmers originally come from?
Their origins trace back to southern China, migrating south from a kingdom called Chenla. They consolidated power, expanded, and accumulated the resources needed for those massive temple projects. Yaovarman II started Angkor Wat around 1113.
An incredible feat. But the kingdom fragmented after him.
For a time, yes. But then Jayavarman VII came along, led a resurgence, rebuild, moved the capital to Angkor Thom with the famous Bayon Temple, and promoted Mahayana Buddhism.
And all this time, Thai people were migrating south from China.
Yes, starting maybe around the 8th century, settling first in places like the Yangtze Valley, Yunnan. By the 10th century, they were absorbing elements of the existing Mon Khmer culture's language, script, religion. They settled mainly east of the main Khmer areas initially.
So even though Ayutthaya later adopted Khmer influences, the original Khmer presence in central Thailand eventually faded.
Largely, yes. Despite Ayutthaya's rapid expansion in central Thailand, the main vestiges of direct Khmer rule are mostly found in ruined temples today. The cultural influence persisted strongly, but direct political control shifted.
Okay, so after Sukhothai and the Khmers declined, Ayutthaya really steps into the spotlight as the dominant power, and it was a major city in its own right.
Oh, definitely. Founded in 1351 by King Uthong, right at that confluence of four rivers, a very strategic spot. It grew incredibly fast, becoming a huge urban center. Some sources suggest it might have been one of the largest, most sophisticated cities in the world at its peak.
Really? That big?
Potentially. It drew traders, missionaries from all over. It was very cosmopolitan, apparently structured more by social class than by race or ethnicity. Architecturally, you see things like Wat Phra Sisangphet, which echoes earlier Sukhothai styles, but also introduces new forms rooted in Buddhist ideas.
An impressive, dynamic place. But like all empires, it eventually declined. What happened in the mid-18th century?
It seems to have been a mix of things. Less effective leadership after King Naresuan, internal power struggles, factionalism. This weakened the kingdom from within.
Making it vulnerable to outside threats.
Exactly, which led to the Burmese invasion and the devastating capture of the city in 1767. But then a general, Thaksin, based in Thonburi, managed to rally forces.
He retook the city.
After about 8 months, yes. And then he decided to move the capital across the river to Thonburi.
And this Thaksin character sounds pretty formidable.
He was, described as tough, ambitious. He defeated the Burmese, brought most of the Old Kingdom back under control, even expanded trade with Europe. But he was also apparently quite ruthless, which eventually caused fear among the nobility, even his own aides.
So the fall of Ayutthaya in 1767, that was a massive shock, a real turning point. The descriptions sound brutal.
They are. The historical accounts paint a picture of utter devastation. A bustling city turned into deserted ruins, overgrown by jungle within years, palaces rotting, shrines covered in weeds. It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can change.
And Thaksin's rise just a few years later, establishing himself, that seems almost miraculous given the circumstances.
It's often portrayed that way, yeah. Coming from relatively low beginnings, facing huge challenges, yet managing to rebuild and reunify so much of the kingdom. It was a remarkable feat.
And during Ayutthaya's long reign, Siam, as it was increasingly known, had more and more contact with the West. How did that shape things?
Well, the Portuguese were the first major European power to arrive, bringing trade goods, but also Western ideas, Christianity. Then came the Spanish, the Dutch, the French, the English, each vying for influence and trade.
A familiar pattern in that era.
Right. And this influx of Western perspectives happening at a time of revolution and rising colonialism elsewhere definitely had a big cultural impact. Siam became much more aware of Western power dynamics and had to navigate carefully to keep its independence.
Did these foreign interactions also cause shifts within Siamese society?
The sources suggest they did, gradually moving away from a purely traditional sort of paternalistic structure, welcoming foreigners in the 17th century, then later the Chakri kings embracing Western science and administration in the 19th century.
In a sense, in the 20th century, that they needed a balance between East and West.
Exactly. But it wasn't always smooth. Parts of the traditional bureaucracy, the established elites, resisted these changes, creating internal friction.
And the fall of Ayutthaya itself, it wasn't just a military defeat, was it? It sounds like it prompted a lot of soul-searching.
Absolutely. It was a profound cultural turning point. It forced a reevaluation of Siam's strengths, its weaknesses, maybe complacency. You see this reflected in historical writing afterwards, even in biographical interpretations.
Like the story of the indifferent prince.
Right, for Majatibori. These stories are used to explore possible internal reasons for the defeat leadership failures, focusing too much on aesthetics versus military readiness, personal flaws. There are even contrasting figures like Majasua and a love ballad supposedly from her perspective, reflecting on the loss and societal values. It shows how deeply the fall resonated.
So after Ayutthaya fell, we have this Thonburi period, led by King Thaksin. Brief, but critical.
Very critical, 1767 to 1782. It was all about restoration, rebuilding, holding things together under Thaksin's strong leadership. Thonburi itself wasn't Ayutthaya. It lacked the grand infrastructure, the established nobility.
Relied more on trade taxes?
Yes, financially it was more precarious, but Thaksin's military skill was absolutely essential. Without him, the kingdom might have fragmented completely. His achievements, considering where he started and who he was up against, were pretty phenomenal.
Which then sets the stage for the next major era, Rattanakosin, and the founding of Bangkok.
Exactly. The Rattanakosin era starts with Phya Chakri becoming King Phutayat Pho Chulalongkorn, or Rama I. And his big move was shifting the capital from Thonburi back across the river to the east bank, naming it Krung Thep Bangkok.
And Rama I set up the administration.
Laid a solid foundation, yes. Administration, law. Then under Rama II and III, you see culture flourishing, language, literature, religion, plus trade expanding, borders being defined more clearly.
And then a really key moment under Rama IV, opening up to the West.
A pivotal decision. Rama IV recognized the growing power of Western nations and decided engagement was better than isolation. He initiated relations, signed treaties with America, France, the Netherlands, Britain.
which leads into the reign of Rama V, often seen as this huge modernizing force.
Hugely influential. King Chulalongkorn, Rama V. His 42-year reign was packed with reforms: administration, tax, police, army, economy, land, revenue, royal affairs. A massive overhaul.
Abolished slavery, too.
Yes, and serfdom. He showed a real focus on the common people's welfare. Plus, his diplomacy was incredibly skillful, steering Thailand through that peak colonial era while keeping its independence.
Quite a legacy.
Immense. He prioritized the country's progress, even pushed for public health measures like mass cleanliness. He was succeeded by Rama VI, who was also very popular.
And the city of Bangkok itself, its location seems almost destined on the River of Fortunes.
Chao Phraya, yeah. The location proved incredibly advantageous. It started as Bang Makok, a smaller, swampier place, but the wide river offered food, water, and crucially, defense. Moving the capital there in 1782 really kicked off a new era.
Building the Grand Palace.
Right, on a spot considered auspicious. Moving people, monks, important Buddha images like the Emerald Buddha. They planned out areas for houses, temples, monasteries. It grew quickly.
Despite maybe some early bumps like fires.
Right. Yeah, initial buildings were often hay or thatch. But soon, impressive structures lined the river, making it a major center. Wat Pho, with the reclining Buddha, became a famous landmark.
And Rama, I was really the driving force behind this initial phase, modeling Bangkok on Ayutthaya's grandeur.
He was the main architect, yes.
Yeah.
He even had the river bend moved slightly. He consciously built Nakorn Luang to echo old Ayutthaya. New temples, palaces next to Wat Phra Kaew housing the Emerald Buddha, public and private palaces, initially timber and bamboo, but with elaborate roofs.
A planned city from the start, it sounds like.
To a large extent. Pavilions for princes, government offices, army barracks, temples for the elite. The ornamental carvings are apparently quite spectacular. From a distance, the city looked white because of the river mud and clay used in building. Inside, fortifications, temples, stupas with gilded roofs, markets, fields. It became a real center of power controlling the river.
And Western influence kept playing a role throughout this Rattanakosin period, too, especially after Ayutthaya's fall highlighted potential vulnerabilities.
Definitely. That awareness, coupled with seeing colonization happen elsewhere, spurred Rama forward and later Rama V towards modernization. It was partly a defensive strategy.
So reforms in government and bureaucracy.
Yes, adopting Western models, especially for administration and law, developing criminal codes, studying foreign legal systems, setting up regulations for courts, army, police, tax collection.
A move towards a more formalized, maybe bureaucratic state.
And a shift in the king's role, too. Less godlike, more answerable, setting up advisory boards, a cabinet based on the French model, separating bureaucracy from the military, creating a Supreme Court.
Trying to improve efficiency and reduce corruption.
That was the aim, employing better educated officials, auditing finances. Of course, this wasn't popular with everyone, especially those in the old guard who lost income or influence, but it was a necessary transformation.
Okay, so this brings us into the complexities of modern Thailand. After colonialism bypassed them and after these modernization efforts, the introduction of a constitutional monarchy in 1932 is a huge moment.
A massive turning point. But crucially, unlike some neighbors, Siam wasn't directly colonized. Yet the shift to a constitutional monarchy in 1932 didn't automatically lead to stable democracy.
No. What happened?
Well, the period that followed saw quite a bit of political instability, constitutional crises. And this actually strengthened the hand of the military and the bureaucracy. Eventually, you get General Seret Thanerat taking power in a coup in 1958, ruling as a military dictator until '63.
But he also pushed modernization.
Yes, despite the political repression, his Seven Rivers reforms led to rapid economic growth, urbanization, social changes. It was framed as this Siamese model, an alternative to both communism and Western capitalism.
But eventually there was pushback, pro-democracy movement.
Right. Opposition grew, especially against Vietnamese communism, but also student-led protests in the late 60s, early 70s. This led to the ousting of Seret's successor in a 1973 coup, backed by civil society. There was a brief window of more open politics.
Only brief.
Yeah, it was curtailed pretty abruptly by another coup in 1976, followed by a harsh right-wing crackdown. Things got very ugly. Leftist students were targeted by pro-government paramilitaries. Thousands fled. Others were arrested. Worse.
Sort of a major social catastrophe.
Definitely. It fueled a kind of socialist insurgency, a conflict between the government and communist parties. It was a really turbulent, divided time. You saw rural people starting to associate their well-being more with civil society movements rather than just traditional politics.
And the push for democracy continued. leading to changes in the 90s.
It did. The movement ousted General Prem in 1992. Tuan Lekpai became the first commoner prime minister, but real liberal reform proved elusive. The period after 92 saw attempts at reconciliation, using Buddhist principles to try and heal the divides.
And the 1997 Constitution, that was significant.
A watershed moment, yes. But then you get the rise of Thaksin Shinawatra, followed by the emergence of the red shirt and yellow shirt movements, polarizing society even further. It's been a continuous cycle of elections, protests, coups. The 2023 elections were contentious, reflecting ongoing unrest. It's a complex, ongoing struggle.
Let's go back to that 1932 moment. Called a revolution, but you said it was more like a coup.
That's how many historians see it now, yeah. A relatively bloodless coup led by this group, the Kanaratsadan, the People's Party, mostly Western-educated guys, aiming to modernize Siam quickly, establish a constitutional monarchy, and crucially, they got the king's agreement.
King Prajatapaka agreed.
He did. He agreed to a constitution that put sovereign power at a national assembly, appointed ministers from the people's deputies. Power definitely shifted from the old aristocracy to this new, middle-class, Western-educated elite.
But they weren't necessarily experienced Democrats.
That's the criticism. They often lacked deep experience in running a state. Their ideology claimed to be democratic, but sometimes their methods were more dictatorial, political repression, limiting press freedom, police having wide powers. Plus, corruption emerged, leading to dissatisfaction, despite, perhaps, good initial intentions.
Then comes World War II. Thailand was in a tough spot.
Very tricky. France, a former ally, had fallen. They were bordered by British territories. Japan was aggressively expanding, needing resources. Initially, Thailand declared neutrality.
But that didn't last.
No. In July 1941, they signed an alliance treaty with Japan, basically allowing Japanese troops and planes onto Thai soil.
How did the public react to that?
Not well, apparently. Government radio might have supported it, but there was widespread public anger, anti-Japanese sentiment. This led to the formation of the Seri Thai, the Free Thai movement, and underground resistance, aided by Allied forces.
So resistance grew as the war went on.
Yes, especially after 1943, as Japan started facing defeats. The image of Japanese invincibility cracked. Resentment against Japanese soldiers grew. There were Allied bombings on Bangkok, causing casualties, panic.
A complex situation with internal resistance and external pressures.
Very. There were plots, skirmishes. As Japan's losses mounted near the end, there was pressure for a puppet government, but Thai resilience held. Japanese troops started withdrawing. Allied undercover agents moved in. It was tense right up to the end.
And then the Cold War. How did that era play out in Thailand?
It overlapped with Thailand's big push for industrial growth, more consumerism, a diversifying economy. But politically, things remained unstable, partly because democratic culture hadn't really taken deep root.
And China's rise complicated things.
Big time. China exporting revolution from 1949, the U.S. worried about losing Southeast Asia. This led to alliances like Seattle to contain China. And U.S. influence in Thailand grew significantly.
Which fueled more military rule.
It coincided with that, yes. Military dictators, coup attempts. The U.S. poured money in, supposedly to fight communism. But some sources suggest elements in the Thai security apparatus might have actually stirred up trouble in Laos and Cambodia, creating tense relations.
Creating problems to justify their own power.
That's the allegation. Initially, there was some public unity against perceived communist threats, but that fractured. Crackdowns on student groups, splits between the U.S. and Thai authorities, accusations of the military faking incidents to blame communists and boost their own standing.
A very murky period.
Extremely. Even King Bhumibol's efforts to promote unity couldn't fully overcome these deep divisions and manipulations.
And more recently, the political scene has remained volatile. Cycles of elections, coups, protests.
That's been the pattern for the last few decades, yes. After military-backed governments, faction-aligned parties came back in 2008, then another coup in 2006. It's been this constant push and pull. Constitutional democracy has existed alongside military interventions.
Highlighting challenges in nation building.
Exactly. Building a stable nation-state, defining citizenship in a globalizing world. These are ongoing struggles. There have been calls for reconciliation. But the landscape often seems fractured, prone to unstable coalitions and conflict. The future really depends on how key players adapt within Thai political culture. Maybe the breakdown of older, rigid systems will allow new voices to negotiate the terms of the nation-state, but it could be a long process.
Looking back, you can see distinct phases in Thai politics since 1932.
Roughly, yes. 1932-58, end of absolute monarchy, struggle for power. 1958-68, military rule. No constitution. 1968-76, attempts at democracy, parliament, post-1976. Repression, more military rule, democracy abandoned again. It's been a real roller coaster.
Lots of constitutions written in scrap, too.
Several, just between 32 and 58. The first was rushed. Amendments added checks and balances. A 1946 constitution introduced concepts like political parties. On the surface, you had elections, cabinets, but stability was elusive. The 1947 coup ended that experiment, leading to disillusionment.
So a history of disappearing democracies and military takeovers.
12 military juntas between 1932 and 1992 alone. The coups in 1991, 2006, 2014 just continued that pattern, increasing instability, leading to more violence in the 2010s. It makes you question the design of political systems in the region sometimes.
There's a model for analyzing these regime changes: origin and mode.
Yes. Origins can be elitist, popular, or external. Modes can be coup, revolution, or takeover. The 1932 change was an elitist coup, replacing absolute with constitutional monarchy. Subsequent changes often involved power struggles leading to more coups. It's kind of a W-shaped pattern, fluctuating between more and less democratic phases, similar perhaps to some Western European histories, but with more frequent military intervention.
And the justifications for recent coups, like 2006 and 2014.
Similar rhetoric usually, overthrowing a bad or corrupt regime, restoring integrity, responding to public discontent, often targeting specific political factions like Thaksin supporters or the red shirts.
And the role of the monarchy in recent politics, it seems complex.
Very. There were reports the late King Bhumibol encouraged elections at one point, maybe out of dislike for Thaksin. But after the 2006 coup, he clearly sided with royalists and endorsed military actions against Thaksin's influence.
So the military governments haven't really solved the underlying tensions.
They've struggled. The 2010 crackdown on red shirts in Bangkok was brutal. Another coup in 2014, backed by royalists. The military regime tried to balance reconciliation with legitimizing its own rule. But by 2018, surveys showed declining support, frustration with the economy, disappointment about democracy, fears of another coup.
And repression continued.
Mass detentions, media restrictions, tearing down protest sites, canceling events. Opposition voices were limited. Academics critical of the regime faced dismissal. Election watchdogs protested unfairness, galvanizing younger activists. But crackdowns often negated these efforts. The atmosphere became quite fearful, with talk of freedom of thought being a political crime. Yet dissent continued online and through petitions. It felt like a losing battle for the regime in some ways.
Let's shift focus a bit to Thailand's cultural evolution. Hinduism and Buddhism seem like the two foundational pillars.
Absolutely. Those two great cultural forces migrated into the region. Hindu ideas spread from India via Indonesia and Malaya. Buddhism, particularly the Theravada school, arrived perhaps more directly from Ceylon, Sri Lanka, especially with the Thai peoples.
And there was a mixing and adoption of cultures.
Very much so. Often, conquered groups adopted the culture or gods of the victors. As kingdoms expanded, they absorbed others with different traditions. The early Siamese, for instance, settling the peninsula, adopted many Khmer customs, caste ideas, manners.
Royal patronage was always important.
Crucial, supporting temples, religious images, even setting trade prices. Laws often didn't bind the nobility in the same way. Kings built walled capitals, elaborate palaces. There was legislation on land, property, even processions and court etiquette, like requiring vassals to go barefoot. Armies were mustered in specific formations. It was a highly structured, hierarchical society, but with undercurrents of resistance or plots for independence sometimes emerging.
And the Thai language itself, when did it become official?
Officially codified since the Chakri dynasty began in 1782, mainly for bureaucratic use. But local dialects persisted. Thai is part of the Thai Kadai language family, related to Lao and Shan, maybe part of an even larger group across Southeast Asia and southern China.
And it borrowed a lot from other languages.
Extensively. Like Malay or Japanese, it's absorbed words from many sources, often changing them significantly. Early on, lots of borrowing from Khmer during the Thonburi and Ayutthaya contact period. Later, from a wider range, including Western languages. You can still hear some chronological influence in non-standard Thai, but the official language is largely standardized now.
Art and architecture are obviously such a huge part of Thai culture, reflecting beliefs and history.
They really are. And there's often a lament for the loss of older artworks. But the art of each era tells you so much about the influences, the face, the aspirations of that time. Theravada Buddhism has been the main theme since Sukhothai, inspiring incredible works.
There's an interesting tension in Buddhist philosophy about art, isn't there? Between creating beauty and the idea of impermanence.
Exactly. Theravada thought sees true beauty in nature as transient. Even heaven and hell are mind states. So, Creating lavish, magnificent art seems almost contradictory. But Thai art embraces this. The magnificence reflects a vision of beauty on earth, drawing from nature, aiming to inspire awe, even while acknowledging that ultimate reality is beyond form. This struggle between permanence and perishing gives Thai art its unique character.
1,000 years of Theravada culture leaving this incredible architectural legacy.
Impressive temples, constantly rebuilt, renovated, each reflecting its time but part of this long tradition. There's a unique beauty that comes from that layering of history, embodying both virtues and miseries.
And Buddhism wasn't the only belief system, right? Older traditions persisted.
Oh yes. You find traces of much older beliefs, ancestor worship, animism, belief in nature spirits, local deities dating back to Neolithic times, thousands of years ago. These often blended with Buddhism later on.
An influence from India brought Hinduism and Brahmanism too.
Right, starting around the 6th century CE. Mon and Khmer cultures adopted these in various ways. For the Thais, while Buddhism became central to state ideology, veneration of Hindu gods like Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva continued even into the Rattanakosin era. It wasn't prohibited.
So a kind of blending.
A characteristic Thai synthesis, really. Buddhism, Brahmanism, Hinduism coexisting, sometimes called a triad. Thais venerate from a guardian spirit for prosperity, often represented by a stone or figure at shrines. King Rama IV even built a Hindu shrine. It reflects this tendency to incorporate different deities, maybe as a way to find balance amidst life's uncertainties, including political ones.
Moving to the economy, it sounds like the private sector has been the real engine of growth in Thailand.
That's largely the assessment, yes. The government played a role, especially early on with modern techniques, but central planning wasn't dominant. State enterprises are relatively small. The government provides infrastructure, but most investment, especially for smaller projects, has been private. Even superscale industries relied on a ready private sector.
But growth brought problems too. Traffic, inequality.
Definitely. Traffic congestion in Bangkok is legendary. Mass transit efforts have been made, but road building often took priority. And problems outside downtown remain. Plus, Bangkok's growth hasn't been matched by secondary cities, limiting outmigration. And income distribution has generally worsened over time and geographically.
So rapid development in some places, but uneven benefits.
That's a fair summary. Still, Thailand's economy generally grew faster than many neighbors, especially after 1985. And when countries like Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia opened up, most industries did well, though agriculture declined in the mid-90s due to falling rice prices.
And then the 1997 financial crisis hit hard.
Crucial moment. Triggered by currency speculation after an economic embargo in 95, they had to float the bad. Debt ballooned in dollar terms. The economy went into recession until about 2001.
What about agricultural development over the longer term? How did rural society change?
In the modern era, you saw a kind of new peasantry emerge, pushing out into frontier areas, often with little government interference or welfare. Families had to be self-sufficient, clearing land, hunting, fishing. It was very much based on the domestic unit, with gendered labor women often in rice fields, men clearing land. By 1940, family farming, wet rice, was dominant.
And post-WWII, rural poverty was a big issue.
Huge. The idea of rural development started gaining traction. King Gumabol was very influential here, writing about it in 1945, presiding over land reclamation events, pushing for agricultural colleges.
And the Cold War impacted rural areas too, with Laos and the drug trade.
Yes. The situation in Laos in the late 50s, with CIA involvement in the opium trade, apparently injected illicit cash into the Thai economy. This coincided with communist insurgencies. General Sarit's government fought a harsh war against both drugs and communism, driving many guerrillas into remote areas where government control was weak anyway.
And Thai industrialization happened in phases.
You could look at it geographically, yeah. Starting around 1950 with auxiliary resource industries, then rapid growth in labor-intensive consumer goods in the 60s and 70s. From the 70s onward, more focus on capital and intermediate industries, and maybe now a shift towards the supply service sector. But progress was uneven across the country, socially, technologically. Policy sometimes seemed to work against natural industrial clustering.
Starting in the mid-50s with imported capital, cheap labor.
Pretty much. Resource-based industries expanded, generally without huge social upheaval initially, though policy weaknesses were noted. 1971 seems like a turning point, a resistance to changing those 1950s policies, leading to concerns about unstable foreign investment, trade balance issues, and a lack of qualitative development in resource industries. Thailand's early advantages really shaped its path as an emerging industrial nation.
And globalization? What were the effects there? Mixed, it sounds like.
Very mixed. Questions about who really benefited. Government cuts hit healthcare for the poor. Critics felt too much power was ceded to foreign interests. Issues like misguided crackdowns in the sex industry, abduction of foreign women, foreign investment ebbed and flowed. Reform plans sometimes clashed with capital interests.
Job losses during reform periods.
Reports of significant job losses, yeah. Retail, development. Even middle-class Thais affected. Resentment grew that harsh measures mainly benefited banks or foreign investors. Some evaluations called the adjustments too severe, ineffective. Banks failed, the bat weakened. Social costs were high. Reports of increased child prostitution, women bearing the brunt, NGOs alleging government complicity.
But then investment firms rushed in to buy up assets.
After the capital flight, yes. Security and investment firms saw opportunities to buy cheap Asian companies, penetrate markets. The global financial crisis added more instability. International organizations like the IMF played a role, trying to reshape economies, shifting maybe towards a more holistic model than purely neoliberal. In Thailand, the conditions were apparently milder, not totally disrupting governance, using loans to guide institutional changes.
Finally, let's touch on the big social changes that went along with all this history. Population dynamics must have been key.
Absolutely. You can't understand social formation without looking at population size, distribution, structure. Thailand's seen instability, falling birth rates recently. How you use your population is crucial for development.
Demography gives us the numbers, the breakdowns.
Right. Density, sizes, languages, abilities. Ideally, you want appropriate size, effective structure, modern distribution. Adjusting proportions can shape society. Governments have sometimes fallen partly due to population pressures or imbalances. Even things like recreation get affected differently under different political systems. Historically, maybe the middle class strengthened, upper middle faded, people move for wages, housing, safety.
Social change is about reshaping things, but you need some stability, too.
Exactly. You modify the system, but basic rights, rules against killing each other, identity records, those need stability. No change means suffering, but total change means chaos, because society relies on continuity.
And Thailand's geography influenced population distribution.
Hugely. A central valley, most dense, western central part sparse due to swamps, southwest coastal plains, good for farming, but maybe less urbanized historically due to geography and British influence nearby. North produces rice, timber, but uplands sparsely populated due to poor transport. South has high rainfall, good living standards, but historically isolated, predominantly Muslim. Bangkok's primacy just grew and grew, especially after WWII.
And socioeconomic development impacted health, like people getting taller.
Yes, that's a fascinating indicator. Studies show Thais born later in the 20th century are taller on average than those born mid-century, reflecting better child health, nutrition. But the gains haven't been equal. Rural-born, Thais benefited less.
Education and health systems themselves changed dramatically, too.
Big time. Education used to be for monks and elites, reinforcing the monarchy. Colonial pressures forced modernization under Ramavi. State schools emerged. Monastic schools modernized. After 1932, the Ministry of Education took full control. School numbers grew, but literacy wasn't universal for older generations. Criticisms arose about lack of focus on morality, monarchy. People shifted from self-sufficient farming to wage labor. Western influences caused confusion, political tensions.
Leading to fragmentation and issues in education today.
Yeah, tribal peoples became minorities, agriculture policy-driven, exam burdens became an issue, internationalization of education, market forces exacerbated inequalities between groups, between urban and rural. It created tension, disruption, a rise in parochial religious schools.
And health saw a similar shift from traditional practices to biomedicine.
A huge shift. Traditional healers, shamans were marginalized as Western-trained doctors became professionals. Biomedicine gained control, though it later faced its own scrutiny. Before, health was just not being sick. Epidemics were explained by myth or magic. Modern medicine came with modern education.
Urbanization is another massive social change, especially Bangkok's explosive growth.
Tracking it precisely is hard due to records and boundary changes, but the trend is undeniable.
Yeah.
So much economic development focused on Bangkok and nearby provinces, from maybe 1 million out of 30 million nationally 40 years ago to 8 million by 1990. It's incredible growth.
Bringing its own set of problems.
3 main ones: managing the urban system itself, dealing with the urban poor, and governing a huge metropolitan area that crosses political lines. Uneven growth created socioeconomic divides within the city, environmental issues. Peri-urban areas, just outside the official limits, saw huge growth, often slums housing people vital to the economy, but marginal politically. This concentration also fueled hopes for new political possibilities, efforts at slum upgrading, rights provision.
Okay, wrapping up, let's place Thailand in the wider world. How is it seen globally?
In Western business terms, it's seen as a solid market population. Location in Asia make it important for consumers, producers, exporters. But its engagement elsewhere, like Latin America, is surprisingly weak.
Really? Even exporting software to Argentina, but no real presence.
That's the example given, yeah. Almost absent in investment flows there, despite potential advantages. Maybe it's Thailand's own pace or focus. Latin America seems to be slowly coming onto their radar. Both regions, Thailand and Latin America, have maybe been slower to take a major role in global decision-making than their potential suggests. There are opportunity costs to slow market entry, especially as other Asian economies have accelerated investment. Thailand's ability to reduce poverty while adapting to global rules, often avoiding major violence, is noted, though.
Are there specific opportunities suggested between Thailand and Latin America?
The sources mention potential for Thai agricultural products in places like Guatemala, Peru, Honduras, tailored for rural markets, expanding snack exports, maybe organic shrimp farming contracts. Could Argentina, despite its debts, be an investment partner, maybe sharing experiences with land issues? It's speculative, but points to untapped potential.
And historically, diplomatic ties went beyond Asia, Middle East, Europe.
Oh, yes. Back in the 17th century, Ayutthaya was a major hub. Powers like the Ottomans, Persians were interested. Trade goods like Iranian vases were common. Siam controlled its coast, was a commercial center in the archipelago with foreign ports. Things got insecure later with European maritime powers. A second wave of European contact came in the 19th century, with Western interventions nearby forcing Siam to re-engage diplomatically, like with Napoleon III's France. Embassies were reestablished. Europeans also ran national centers, or schools, maintaining neutrality but becoming influential advisors.
And regionally, Thailand's history is intertwined with its neighbors, resisting Khmer dominance, unifying different Thai groups.
Exactly. That narrative of emerging from the shadow of the Khmer Empire, the rise of Sukhothai, the eventual unification under Ayutthaya, and later the Chakri dynasty, preserving independence while modernizing. That's central to the national story, contrasted often with India, which had a different dominant civilization and was colonized.
Tourism became important later, too, showcasing culture.
From the late 19th century, yes. Showcasing natural beauty, cultural wealth. Travel agencies emerged. Cultural shows, especially highlighting that Brahmin-Buddhist blend. But by the 1970s, mass tourism faced scrutiny for its impacts, leading to alternatives. State bodies like the Tourism Authority worked to shape cultural tourism, using museums in Bangkok as key resources. But there were critiques about stereotype portrayals and maybe lacking big ideas for museums in a competitive world.
So bringing this all together, Thailand's history is incredibly complex, a real tapestry of influences shaping the nation.
It really is. And what stands out is its distinctive cultural and structural identity compared to neighbors. The dominant religion is different, for example, and the emphasis on protecting royalty is such a core national ideology, perhaps more overtly than in some other Southeast Asian countries.
This sense of unique Thainess, it's been consciously developed over centuries.
Since Ayutthaya, through the Kingdom of Siam right up to today, scholars have focused on defining this uniqueness politically, economically, socially.
And studying this history serves important national goals.
Definitely. Three key aims often cited are searching for identity and origins. A lack of identity is seen negatively, preserving that identity against change and perceived threats, and emphasizing past glories, achievements of ancestors and kings to build national pride, sometimes selectively, avoiding the negative bits.
Right. So there we have it, an incredible journey through Thailand's history from those earliest migrations, the rise and fall of kingdoms, interactions with world, right up to modern complexities. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How much of those ancient kingdoms, their traditions, art, ways of thinking, still subtly shapes Thai society today?
That's the fascinating question, that enduring legacy.
And how will that unique Thai identity continue to evolve, especially with globalization and all the modern pressures? Definitely food for thought.
A lot to ponder.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the history of Thailand.